In today's video, I'm going to go over 5 signs that someone lacks self-awareness. And as I go through these signs, I want you to approach this in 2 ways. First, you will probably recognize people in your life who display some of these behaviors. That is normal. Many of us have encountered people like this. But second, and this is the important part, I want you to also reflect on yourself, because none of us are perfectly self-aware. Every single person watching this video has likely done at least one of these things at some point. And interestingly enough, learning these patterns can actually increase your own level of self-awareness. One more thing before we get into it. I also want you to understand why people lack self-awareness, not just what it looks like, because nobody actually wants to have low self-awareness. It is not necessarily a conscious choice. The people who struggle with this the most are often completely unaware that they're doing it. That's the whole paradox. So, as we go through each sign, I'll explain what's driving it underneath the surface. That being said, let's get into it. The first sign that someone lacks self-awareness is that they never apologize. You have probably been here. Someone does something that clearly causes harm to you, to the relationship, to someone else, and instead of owning it, they dodge, they deflect, they minimize. Sometimes they flip it entirely and make you feel like you're the problem for bringing it up. And the frustrating thing is, relationships rarely fall apart because of the initial damage. They fall apart because of the lack of repair, the apology that never comes, the acknowledgement that was withheld, the moment where someone could have said, "You know what, I was wrong and I'm sorry," and chose not to. That absence does some real damage over time. It creates distance. It makes the other person feel like their experience doesn't matter. And eventually, people stop bringing things up altogether, not because things got better, but because they've given up on repair ever happening. So why do people struggle so much with apologizing? It is almost an ego problem, and not in the way people usually mean. The ego's job is to protect you from uncomfortable emotions like shame and guilt. And for some people, the act of apologizing feels like opening a floodgate to those emotions. So instead of sitting with a little discomfort in the short term, they put their pride first. They protect themselves from feeling bad at the expense of the relationship. And here's what makes this especially tricky. It is largely unconscious. The person isn't there thinking, "I know I was wrong, but I refuse to say it." The brain has rationalized the situation just enough so they genuinely believe they don't owe anyone an apology. Blame shifting, repressing, reframing, these are defense mechanisms, and they operate just below the level of conscious awareness. It takes real self-reflection to bring this to the surface, and it takes practice to learn that apologizing isn't a sign of weakness. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're surrendering. When it's genuine, it's one of the most powerful things you can do for a relationship and for your own integrity. The second sign someone lacks self-awareness is chronic defensiveness. You know this dynamic. You bring something up, gently, carefully. Maybe you've even rehearsed how you're going to say it, and the moment it lands, walls go up instantly. They're looking for a loophole. They're reframing what happened. "That's not what I said. That is not what I meant. You are twisting it." If they're caught in something, they tend to double down. The brain moves at lightning speed to find an exit from accountability. And the reason this is infuriating is that there's no way in. No matter how you frame it, no matter how calm your tone is, it becomes a personal attack. Everything feels like a threat to their identity. You might spend 10 minutes carefully choosing your words, genuinely trying to communicate something important, and none of that matters. The defensiveness is a reflex. It fires before they've even fully heard what you said. And here's what's happening underneath that. People with lower self-esteem tend to confuse feedback about their behavior with a verdict on their worth as a person. So when you say, "Hey, it bothered me when you did that," what they hear is, "You're telling me that I am fundamentally flawed." And of course, they're going to fight that. Of course, they're going to push back hard. People with higher self-esteem can receive criticism about a behavior or a specific action without feeling like their entire personhood is under attack. They can separate the two. They can hear, "That thing you did hurt me," without translating it into, "I'm a bad person." And that's a skill. It's a skill that requires self-awareness to develop. Now, there's a distinction worth making. If someone is genuinely attacking your character, some defensiveness is understandable, and that's a completely different situation. But when a person reacts that intensely to normal, reasonable feedback that was delivered with care, that's the ego doing what it always does, protecting itself from sitting with something uncomfortable. The third sign someone lacks self awareness is having limited emotional vocabulary. And this one might surprise you. Emotions are single words: sadness, anger, fear, joy, frustration, loneliness, shame, excitement, and so on. They describe an internal state, not a thought, not a behavior, and not a plan. People with low self awareness often can't actually name what they're feeling when you ask them. Instead, they'll say something like, I feel like I need to get outside some more, and that's not a feeling, that's a behavior. Or, I feel like nobody really sees me, that's a thought. Or, I feel like you never listen, that's an accusation. None of those things are feelings. And this difference matters more than people realize. Feelings should be validated. Thoughts can be examined, questioned, and even challenged. So when someone says, I feel like you're being controlling, that is not a feeling. That's an interpretation. And interpretations aren't automatically true. There may be a real feeling underneath it. Maybe they feel anxious or suffocated or scared, but the interpretation layered on top of it is a story, and stories can be inaccurate. If you respond to that interpretation as though it's a fact, you have validated a narrative that may have nothing to do with what actually happened. But if you can get to the actual emotion underneath, it sounds like you're feeling anxious, is that right? Now you have something real to work with. On the flip side, when someone can clearly say, I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling hurt, that opens up something so real. You can respond to that, you can connect with that, and you cannot really connect with a vague, undefined fog of emotion that the other person cannot articulate. The good news here, of all 5 signs, this one is the most teachable. Expanding your emotional vocabulary is genuinely learnable. It doesn't require dismantling deep ego structures or years of therapy. You can start today. There are even tools for it like the emotions wheel that help people identify and name what they're actually experiencing with much more precision. The ego isn't fighting as hard on this one. It's more of a gap in education than a defense mechanism. Which means if this is an area that you want to grow in, the path forward is relatively straightforward. The fourth sign someone lacks self-awareness is something called mood incongruence, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. When you're with someone, you naturally pick up on how they're feeling, their words, their tone, their body language. It all communicates an emotional state. And when you're socially attuned, you meet them roughly where they are. This means you read the room, and you adjust. People who lack self-awareness often miss this completely because they're so focused on their own internal experience that they're not actually tracking anyone else's. Someone shares exciting news and the low self-awareness person immediately becomes a contrarian. Oh yeah, but did you hear it's supposed to rain later? Actually, I heard next week it's going to be even worse. Instead of sharing in the moment, they derail it. The other person came in waiting to celebrate and they leave feeling deflated. Or the opposite, someone is grieving, processing something genuinely painful, and the low self-awareness person goes full optimism mode. Everything happens for a reason. You're going to be fine, or at least this didn't happen. The intention might be to help, but the effect is that the person feels completely unseen. Like their pain was an inconvenience to be managed rather than something worth acknowledging. There's also a subtler version of this that I think it's important to point out. Sometimes the person does match the emotion, but they crank the intensity past the other person. If someone is sad, they become more sad than that person. They make it about their own pain. Or if someone shares good news, they immediately one-up it with an even bigger accomplishment. And what was supposed to be a moment of connection now becomes a competition. Instead of being with the other person, they have made themselves the center of the emotional experience. Emotional attunement, being at roughly the same emotional register as the people around you, or slightly dialed back, is a quiet but powerful sign of self-awareness. It means you're actually tracking what's happening in the room rather than broadcasting your own internal state onto everyone else. The fifth sign someone lacks self-awareness is one of the most common and most misunderstood: unintentionally invalidating other people's emotions. And here's why this one is tricky. It almost always comes from a good place. Someone is upset and the person with low self-awareness immediately jumps into fix-it mode. Don't feel that way. Look on the bright side. Think about it from this angle. Have you tried this? They're not being malicious at all. They genuinely want the other person to feel better. But what they're actually communicating is, your emotion is a problem that needs to be solved as quickly as possible. The underlying fear is that if you validate a painful emotion, if you sit with someone in their sadness or their anger or their grief, the person is going to drown in it, that they're just going to get stuck there, that validating will actually make it worse. And that is not at all what happens. It's actually the opposite. When you validate an emotion, when you say, that makes sense, of course you feel that way, I get it, it actually reduces the intensity of that emotion. It gives the person permission to feel what they're already feeling without having to fight it themselves on top of it, and that they're not alone in that feeling anymore. And that sense of being seen and understood is often exactly what allows someone to start moving through the emotion rather than staying stuck in it. Validation also doesn't mean agreement. It doesn't mean you think the situation is completely hopeless. It just means you're acknowledging that the feeling makes sense given what they're going through. And that is it. And that is enormously powerful. People who skip this step, who immediately jump to reframing, silver linings, or problem solving, often don't realize what they're doing. They're not trying to dismiss anyone, but without awareness of how their responses land, they keep rupturing connection with the very people that they're trying to support. So, there they are. 5 signs someone lacks self-awareness: never apologizing, chronic defensiveness, an inability to name emotions, mood incongruence, and unintentionally invalidating others. That's it for today's video. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you, and see you in the next one.